Flabbergasted by the overwhelming sight and rejuvenating air, I just stood there. That is until I realized how two enormous guards were keeping me out of this paradise. Not feeling remotely like a timid maiden, at least not at this point, I mockingly approached one of the obscenities and dealt with it. After allowing myself to enjoy the warmth, seemingly coming from a furnace inside the clumsy guard, I took care of its poor friend, and finally got the opportunity to appreciate the magnificent nature around me. Feeling insignificant and minuscule compared to the towering Erd tree, I was weighed down by the immensity of it all. Resting on the slightly damp soil covered with fading grass, I contemplated the passing of time. Everything had seen better days in this world, but the decay somehow felt different here, in a kingdom once able to maintain roads and stately monuments. Being overwhelmed by curiosity in the face of such new sensory riches, I summoned Torrent, and together we headed eastward, wanting to make good haste and approach the grand capital. Before long, we arrived at monumental and imposing stairs, apparently protected by hidden marksmen, as well as fierce soldiers dressed in golden attire and showing an eagerness to earn their keep. But I didn't care one bit. Those puny servants wouldn't be able to. What? Was that an arrow in my skull? Suddenly feeling a bit under the weather, fear took hold of me, and I cried out for Torrent to ride like there was no tomorrow. But just as we approached enormous gates at the end of the stairs, two large golden knights on menacing steeds came straight at us. Clearly one wasn't enough. Overcome by pure panic, I darted past them and in despair took a sharp turn to the right, arriving at a nearby camp, which, oh joy, was home of another creature far more infernal than those two suspiciously big-boned knights. Trembling with terror, I quickly grabbed an absurdly heavy weapon from a nearby chest, and then that ghastly thing discovered me. Terrified, I tried to escape once again. This wasn't paradise by any stretch of the imagination. If anything, it was a hellish land in the guise of radiant decay. After miles of humiliating retreat, we reached a lonely and ruinous church, inhabited only by cracked pots. They were long forgotten and overgrown, just like the crumbling walls of this once important place of worship. Standing here, close to the unmountable walls of the capital, I came to the conclusion that its main gate would be an outright nightmare, considering the monstrosities we had just barely survived. I decided to look for another way into this city, something a bit more discreet and befitting an aging gentleman such as myself. For hours, I searched both high and low in the nearby area, glaring into foggy and bottomless pits. Wait, was that a hidden cave entrance? Being this close to the city, that opening had surely been used by rulers in ancient times as an escape route. More importantly, if you could get out of there, you could also get in. We entered what turned out not to be a cave, but rather a mine. Even better. Inside this hollowed-out mountainside, I was puzzled by the absence of tunnels. Yet it wasn't empty, because I could hear workers somewhere close. Would you know it? I had found what was hidden and entered a dusty area with worn-down slaves. After generously freeing them from their tragic fate of servitude and killing their devious, little and filthy guard, I came upon one of those precious and pearl-like artifacts of use to the husky grannies in Round Table Hold. Sadly, it turned out that the mine didn't contain any further secrets, and as I left this disappointingly meager mirage, I was forced to reconsider my initial plan. Wait a moment, who was that? What a peculiar mask. I realized the necessity of more detailed knowledge about this land and grabbed a nearby map. Then, after sneaking past those golden harbingers of doom and riding through a bear-filled ravine, I got hold of the other weathered document and proceeded north. Truth be told, I couldn't help myself at this point. There was something which lured me this way. I ever so briefly palavered with one of the toothless and finger-loving grannies and gave her my best. Coming upon a portal near a broken-down bridge, once crossing the dark forest below, I tried my luck. I now found myself in a landscape adorned with worn-down windmills. Just as I had hoped for, I had gone to the other end of that disintegrated piece of civilization. But who was that lone individual? My inherent longing for friends was once again shattered as I came upon a mummified, long-dead figure. Amusingly, though, he wore an outlandish and somehow familiar mask resembling the sun and pointed up into the sky with that ghoulish hand of his. There it was, the capital with its glorious tree, towering like a sacred monument piercing the very heavens. Yet the pain of my loneliness swept over me. I needed to find a family before venturing any further, and yearned deeply for relief and camaraderie now that Alexander had gone off on his own journey. I descended to another plateau with a muddy path leading west, apparently used by a caravan, and I allowed myself to succumb to a most basic instinct. In the chest, so vigilantly protected by the lowly henchman, I found yet another weapon. Oh, by the gods, so many rare gifts and so little time. Sadly, a safe haven was required before I could study them in greater detail. I had somehow been drawn into the dark forest and now rode through an eerie fog, home to repulsive and worm-like things. Once again, I was reminded that, strictly speaking, you weren't required to get acquainted with every single living creature met along the way. Sometimes it is better not to follow your inclination. As if I hadn't suffered enough already, my wits crumpled, as it turned out this entire forest was littered with the most unappealing beings ever created. Riding in panic, I came upon wandering packs, and was exhausted when I, thank the gods, found a way out of this claustrophobic prison of fog. It was out here, among the autumn trees with leaves forever not fallen, that I saw the great lift of Dectus, and was reminded of an all but forgotten invitation. Feeling despair slowly take hold of me, I searched the area for that glimmer of hope given to me so long ago. And finally, there she was.
I've been waiting for you. I knew you had the stuff of champions. I hereby invite you to the Volcano Manor. Take my hand.
I was about to travel to a civilized place, a stronghold with friends, camaraderie, and best of all, no Gideon or finger-loving grannies. Everything went dark, and I awoke in a warm and luxuriously decorated hall. At the far end, a lady of noble lineage sat, and as I slowly approached her, it became apparent that she was wearing a silvery mask. Finally treated kindly by fate, I rejoiced at my good fortune and spoke to the woman about to welcome me into a family of champions. What was I even thinking? If I spoke dressed like this, I would be a prophet of falsehoods. I had not come into this world with these fine layers of clothing. I had worn ragged and worn-down gear. Changing into my old armor, I was finally ready and mustered the courage to address this lady, who could grant me what I most longed for, a sense of belonging.
Brave Tarnished. Welcome to the Volcano Manor. I am Tanith, the proprietress of this house. Raya spoke well of you.
Did she now?
A warrior of promise.
Well, if that was her impression.
Perhaps you are prepared to make a commitment.
I have traveled for so long and deeply yearned for this. I'm ready.
Why accept the burden of their grace, or be fooled by the dogmatic ramblings of the fingers?
Did she have an issue with the hairy fingers? Finally, someone in this god-forsaken world who saw them for what they were.
Your decision is most welcome. Now you belong to the Volcano Manor family. The drawing room lies down the hall.
What beautiful words.
Make yourself comfortable. but be sure to earn your keep.
Surely she had recognized my worn-down attire for what it truly was, an ever so grand expression of deep-seated humility. I took a brief glance at the stately dining table situated in the middle. What splendor! Ready to make myself comfortable, I began looking for the drawing room. Now slowly walking down the corridor, I realized that this manor might yet offer more than mere platonic pleasures, the red and suggestive lighting considered. I felt, from somewhere deep within, that this place would leave its mark on me, and it most certainly did, just not in the merry way I thought at that time. Upon reaching a splendid space of warmth, and recognizing the servant who had brought me here, I ran to her and offered my gratitude.
Hello again, brave Tarnished. As a scout, I am pleased to see you again here at the Volcano Manor.
A scout? So I was examined and had been found worthy. This most welcome adventure only got better by the minute. Wait a moment. I knew that warrior. What was he doing here? Apparently, he wondered about the very same thing.
You. What in heaven's name are you doing here? The Volcano Manor is a pit of recusants who spit at grace and hunt our own kind. I hope you understand the weight of my words.
Of course he was mistaken, but I just nodded. 'Twas best not to disagree with clearly unstable individuals, especially those wearing unsettling helmets. Speaking of that hideous thing on his head, I couldn't think of anything else. The set was a beauty to behold, no denying that. But that ghastly piece, perhaps it would do under more private and playful circumstances. But someone would have to behead me before I would wear that thing in public. A severed finger, that wasn't entirely civilized. Surely something the deranged warrior had brought with him. Shaking the sudden nausea, I found myself drawn to the rest of this otherwise alluring manor. Eventually, I noticed doors leading outside at the far end of a long corridor. And filled with joyous suspense, I ran toward the light. Most likely the manor would be situated in radiant and magnificent nature. Maybe it would even be a cultivated mirror image of lush Limgrave. It was not. Instead, the land around me contained slowly rotting creatures hung from wooden poles, like trophies acquired during a long-forgotten war, and beneath my feet were piles of scorched corpses, which with the passing of time would become part of the soil. This kneeling brute obviously wasn't a guard, but a mean-spirited assailant waiting for family members to torment. I did my best, but some of those manically dancing soldiers dressed like cages helped that oversized ruffian. Not the slightest related to my unfortunate encounter, I decided on a whim not to venture outside again. Instead, I walked up a nearby stairway and ended up in a magnificent dining hall. I had never seen such riches before. This truly was a civilized asylum in a world utterly devoid of any sort of grace. Who was that? What a peculiar individual. The reddish hue revealed him to be an invader from another world. But why did he even attack me? I wasn't prepared for any of this. That was why he got the better of me. It wasn't a question of skill, but rather terror caused by that mask made out of blood-soaked bandages. What was he hiding beneath those moist layers of secrecy? It didn't matter, because I quickly found my way back, and made sure this time to ignore his unappealing demeanor. Upon finishing him, he left a strange and off-putting weapon, which I would study later. But at this point, I had become far more interested in a painting on the wall. As I wondered who that was supposed to be, I felt a chill running down my neck. Perhaps this so-called family of champions wasn't the epiphany of comradeship and nobility after all. Taking it upon myself to look into the matter, I searched the nearby rooms, and sure enough, there were hidden corpses with exotic treasures, and even more suspicious, walls of sorcery hiding dark corridors. What was that? Running in this damp darkness, I wrecked several of those slimy critters, except for one curious pack having some sort of secret rendezvous. This dungeon, however, contained creatures of a far more lethal nature. I didn't think it would be any trouble until I noticed the bloodstains. It would be selfish to bother anyone with tales of yet another untimely death, seeing as this outcome was solely related to the darkness which surrounded me. I couldn't see anything, let alone fight under these circumstances. Equipping the lantern I had bought ages ago, that vile and doggish knight got what was coming to it. And as I annihilated this sneaky basement dweller with that unsightly curved sword, yet another item of war was left behind by the victim. Why this vulgar and quite frankly perverse fondness for stomach-turning weapons? Reaching a small and secluded chapel deep beneath the manor, I was slowly beginning to accept that this notion of brotherhood had been an illusion altogether. My real family wasn't here. Instead, there was only loneliness and despair. But I hadn't even realized just to what extent I had been misled by my fragile sense of self. Finally, a heavy shadow was lifted from my eyes, and with horror, I now recognized this infernal manor with its rivers of fire and brimstone. Bloody hell. The last time I had found myself in this fiery domain was during my exploration of the academy. At the bottom of that dishonest institution, a hungry Iron Maiden had snatched me, and after being digested in her suffocating innards, I was unkindly exiled to this very place. And now I was back. It almost seemed as if fate wanted me to proceed deeply into this region of sulfur and air so hot that breathing felt like drinking a putrid substance. But what was that hideously large snake doing nearby? It appeared to be guarding this place, and did so with a rather crude sword. Either way, it got destroyed as the vermin that it was. This entire area struck me as outright bizarre. Old and weathered buildings stood so close that you could walk on the rooftops and in minutes reach the far end. But still, during the next couple of hours, I somehow managed to get myself into a myriad of skirmishes. I was assaulted by dogs, saw Iron Maidens wandering the neighborhood, entered a heated dialogue with a burly and horrendously unsightly fellow, equipped with perhaps the most unsettling axe ever made, and of course, met up with even more of those long-necked snake guards. After searching these fairly unattractive surroundings for viable paths leading forward, I entered an old building that not only was dark as the grave, but also contained nasty, bearded critters falling down from the ceiling. What was that? In this dark and dank dungeon of distress, there were other creatures as well, and by the gods, they were frightening, to say the least. Quite disgusting as well. Struck by terror, I ended up running blind through the darkness, while being scared half to death by distant noises of horror, and eventually found heavy doors. I slowly pushed them open, hoping for the best. Tumbling buildings in a volcanic inferno came into view. As I fell down to the steaming earth at the bottom of this scorched community, I was thoroughly bewildered. What had even happened here? One thing was sure, this entire place was plagued by godless and witless creatures, seemingly made out of lava. As I proceeded along a nearby path leading upward, I saw phantoms exhibiting a curiously careful behavior. Why the necessity for stealth here? Surely not because of this measly and slithering guard. Perhaps there was something else going on close by, and as I studied an open cage, I realized that it was a small lift. Oh dear, confined to what had most likely been a death sentence once upon a time, I was relieved when it reached its destination. Wait a moment. Was that monk guarding something? Naturally, that henchman had to die, and upon delivering him from further disappointments in life, I was ready to see just what that sadly impotent warrior was supposed to protect. What were those enormous wheels for? I quickly realized that this mechanical contraption had been connected to a bridge. But obviously this ancient device had stopped working eons ago, and the bridge itself was long gone. For some reason, however, as I pushed that curious instrument, the ground beneath me rumbled, and those giant wheels began to turn once again. What was going on in those hellish depths? From somewhere under the thick rivers of fuming lava, a red-hot and glowing metal structure rose. It was at this point I finally came to terms with the astonishing fact that the bridge hadn't been destroyed after all. By the gods, how did the masters of old create such wonders? Thus, I ended up running onto something that, under more conventional circumstances, might as well have been a bridge over troubled waters. Finally ready to look into what that worthless guard had tried to protect, I approached what appeared to be a temple. It had a deep red hue, but unlike the alluring sensations evoked by the manor, this one felt more like a poisonous womb. As I slowly walked into this eerie site of worship, adorned with sculptures of snakes, I passed broken chandeliers, and then black flames erupted in front of me. A grotesquely obese creature appeared out of nowhere and went straight for me. I was reminded of that abject monster, hiding in the depths of the Kaled Tower. Had I stumbled upon its brother, this obscenity even shared the same perverse sense of fashion, proudly wearing disgustingly thick layers of shredded skin. And just like that, a fierce gust of fleshy shockwaves ended me. This was by far the most repulsive thing I'd ever seen. Much to my dismay, I was forced to cross that bridge again and again during the next couple of hours. I learned the ways of his powerful thrust, which for some reason reached from one end of the temple to the other. He was especially fond of rapid thrusts, which darted out from that obscene body with unreal speed. And of course the monstrosity made especially nasty jumps, making the entire manor rumble beneath his quivering mountain of flesh. Oh dear God. That did it. I wasn't going to allow this diseased lump of a fleshy skin lover to keep ruining my very existence any longer. Why had I even insisted on wearing my old gear? Obviously, the lady of this manor was a cruel mistress, not to be trusted, and the entire notion of a family of champions had turned out to be a sick joke. I changed into the fine set of armor I had bought from those husky grannies at the Round Table Hold, and decided to try out that enormous great hammer shaped like a star. Hungry for retribution, I now invoked the gravity-defying powers of a recently deceased general and headed into my final encounter with that bloated fortress of flesh. The weapon worked like a charm, and that great star in my hand tore into this fiend. But it also seemed to rejuvenate me at the same time. Once again, ready to use his immense body as a deadly weapon, I stopped him cold and thoroughly enjoyed seeing how this vile villain left himself open to even more of my delightful attacks. Barely avoiding his vulgar explosion of corporal energy, I was thrown to the ground as he came down with the weight of an entire village. But none of this changed anything, because my will was unbreakable, and only seconds after giving him his last rites, I obliterated the abomination. In the wake of his death, I was given his piercing nightmare of a weapon, and somehow acquired knowledge of that dark incantation used by him. Having bested what surely had been the lord of this degenerate family of champions, I felt worn down and relieved as I approached the altar. He was dust now, and the manor, which had succumbed to visions of make-believe snake lords, could slowly begin its journey back to sanity. Searching the nearby altar, I found a disturbing object. A bulging pouch of organic material with a damp layer of skin surrounding it. What a repugnant thing. But realizing that the floor was covered with bloodstains, I quickly forgot my thoughts and allowed the echoes of past tragedies to soothe me. It felt gratifying to see defeats this close. Oh, he had it coming. What on earth was that fellow dodging around for? He looked plain ridiculous with that helmet. You reap what you sow, my dear. Just like that, those precious glimpses of other people's misery led me to a lift that took me up to the next floor. What was this? Why would fellow travelers even jump onto that thing? No true knight had any good reason to play on profane statues as if they were toddlers on wooden horses. I gazed at the surroundings and felt nothing but fatigue and a dash of misanthropy. The inhabitants of this manor had been waylaid by a superstitious cult of snake worshippers, and as I soldiered on, I bore witness not only to an ancient town slowly receding into an ocean of lava, but also a steady stream of sickly creatures. There were iron maidens, slimy snake guards, and even those disgusting beings, sadly imprisoned by matter, both thick and blackened. It was at this point that I discovered a lift going down, and before long I arrived at the very temple where I had bested that abominable swordsman. Going up again, however, I somehow discovered a hidden chamber, full of nothing but emptiness and the broken dreams of a lone ghoul. Imagine living your life in servitude, only to end up on a stained mattress as a withered corpse. I found myself wondering how this once seething center of civilized behavior had degenerated to such a degree. What had caused this failure of morals? That indecent obscenity back in the temple had corrupted the entire estate from its very roots. Oh no, please not again. Losing any urge for further nostalgic contemplation, I returned to where that hidden assassin had been lurking. But before tearing that snake to pieces, I couldn't help noticing piles of lowly servants, just like those outside the gates. Had this entire world simply gone mad, or was it perpetually entranced in a haze of bloodlust and purges? Generously given the opportunity to return pain and suffering, I came down on the slithering guard and began feeling rejuvenated again. Entering another suggestively lit room with the last killing still ringing in my ears, I sensed that something was about to be revealed. Sure enough, the large, heavy doors opened to an outlandish sight. Several of those poisonous fellows knelt before a gravestone. Scattered across the floor, adorned with luxurious carpets, were even more bones in the process of decomposition. What had been going on here, and why were they moaning? The sounds echoed through the great hall, making me shiver with disgust. For no particular reason, I decided I would be better off going the other way. I left whatever was waiting on the stairs behind. This decision was made with icy logic, where lesser souls might have been driven this way by unbecoming fear. Upon feeding two small imps, hungry for stone keys, I was granted entrance to a dark corridor, which in turn led me to a peculiarly foreboding and large room. What was it with this manor and its off-putting obsession with crates? Yet had it not been for a kind message from another traveler revealing precious knowledge, I most likely wouldn't have found the secret path which took me even further down into this building of depravity. Truth be told, from this point on, I didn't feel particularly pleased with either myself or the situation as a whole. This part of the manor was macabre, And even though I found a clearly valuable talisman reeking of power, I still couldn't fend off a distinct sense of dread. These bleak circumstances forced me to perform dexterous acrobatics, more befitting a nimble jester in some degenerate court than a warrior haunted by gloomy notions of Untergang. Finally, I reached the suspiciously sticky ground floor of this bizarre and troubling place, only to find myself greedily embraced by a pack of hideous monstrosities lurking in the shadows. Moaning with pain, I was killed in moist and unwanted intimacy. Annoyed, and honestly a little rattled as well, I somehow managed to get back into that eerie space of suffocating flesh, and ran like there was no tomorrow. After acquiring rare knowledge at the far end of this nauseating part of the manor, I noticed a curious painting of a long-forgotten nameless king. As I was being chased, I realized that his fierce appearance most likely concealed impotence, as was often the case. Oh, precious light. I had managed to escape the critters, but even as I now sought to flee one of those stern iron maidens, those bulgy creatures followed me outside. I did my best, but to no avail, and before I knew it, they were all over me, biting and tearing, even with that dictator of a damsel chiming in as well. To hell with this place and those despicable things. Having decided instead to see what was up those stairs, what were they looking at? Never mind. I wanted to go the other way now. No reason to intrude on creatures clearly yearning to be left alone. Back at the stairs, I saw the thing for what it was. An unhatched extremity. What a sick place. But of course, this was a dead end, and with those slimy snake guards doing their best to end me, I manically dodged their relentless attacks until I was blessed with the means to escape. I'd been transported to a secluded cave, without even the slightest sign of trouble. I was able to breathe freely once again. Another shimmering wall was down here, but considering the amount of suffering that fleshy wielder of black flames had caused me, I doubted that this would even be a challenge. After stumbling upon heaps of skulls littering the ground and noticing abnormally sized chandeliers, I found myself in an enormous cave with smoldering pillars composed of scorched corpses. I had never even thought such an abhorrent devastation of bodies to be possible. But what was the strange object in that fiery pit? It was too large to be a living organism, yet the object seemed to shiver, as if trapped in an uneasy sleep. Oh no, their snake god had not been a false idol after all. It was alive. I couldn't believe my own eyes as I found myself in the midst of a fiery lake, being pummeled by this obnoxious fiend. How naive I had been, thinking that the cultists of the manor merely worshipped a figment of their imagination. With their abject statues and blasphemous rumors, they yearned for their ruler. I once again entered that lair of unexpected suffering, but this time as I ran past the piles of scorched corpses near the entrance, something caught my attention. Was that a large spear? Curious as to why that weapon hadn't melted yet, I made my way down to the hideous snake, which the inhabitants of this manor clearly worshipped as a godlike creature. But my puny attacks did me little good. That snake monstrosity spewed vile poison at me, dear God, and just like that, I was annihilated once more. At that point, I felt rage deep within, and equipped those deplorable claws I had found so long ago. Positioning myself right in front of this abhorrent monument, I began to shred the creature while flames erupted around me, burning my skin through the armor set, which now also included the tightly locked helmet. It went on for an eternity. I tore into that ghastly thing, then tried to limit the damage to my aching body as it smoldered in the flames, and finally went back to piercing the vulgarity that it was. Until something quite extraordinary happened. It gave in. Ha! I had bested it with little effort. No need to worry after all. Why was the dead snake moving? Did someone pull the other end? And if so, who? I stood as if petrified when a disfigured face reared its ugly head. Oh dear. By the gods, did it actually have people inside its obscene body?
Very well.
And a hand. Why did it need a hand? Please, no more. This was too much. Then, and I swear this to be true, it somehow retrieved a giant sword from its boiling belly. Even worse, that gruesome weapon was in some strange way alive.
Join myself and King as remedy. Together we will devour the very god.
Oh no, this truly was a snake god, and the creature inside the snake, or perhaps it was the snake itself, wielded its revolting sword with unparalleled strength. From this point, the already overwhelming fight became something else altogether. A cataclysmic carnival of terror, with explosive phantom skulls burning me to cinders. I distinctly remember thinking, I'd rather not. Then I ran back. Struck with fear, I now tried to escape, only to discover that the entrance was barred. I couldn't get out. In my desperation, I reached out for that strange and mighty spear left behind by some long-forgotten visitor. While the serpent hurled those grinning explosions at me, I tried to use the weapon, only to be thrown to the ground. I held it tight, and was suddenly overwhelmed by its immense power. Alas, it was too late, and my discovery didn't stop me from being reduced to ashes.
Now we can devour together.
But now, oh, what precious knowledge I had gained. This time I approached the monstrosity with fierce bloodlust and evoked the dormant powers of the spear with glee. The deep rumbling caused by the snake being knocked unconscious gave me an orgasmic joy and made me shiver with lewd delight. This spear had obviously been crafted by divine creatures, seeing as it was able to beat such an infernal titan into smithereens. As the perverse creature was once again put to sleep, I carefully studied its horrendous face, while waiting for it to reveal its true self, one final time. This was it. I felt it deep within. I had this one chance at redeeming myself. And then a most unappealing thought crept into my mind. Could this unnerving phenomenon maybe have been a mortal man at some point? There was something about this thing. Its surprising use of language, not to mention its deep-seated vulgarity and mean-spirited demeanor, which suggested some trace of humanity. Nay, I was imagining things. Thus, giving in to the glorious power of this ancient spear, I overcame the insufferable heat and went for it. There he towered, this man-snake, like a hellish god from some unknown dimension, and as he raised his breathing sword of boiling limbs and innards, I impaled that repulsive creature once and for all. Its voice lingered in the suffocating air, and from everywhere and nowhere, that vile thing spoke foreboding words.
I servant never die.
While trying to reconcile myself with what had just happened, the preposterous nature of this unholy underground domain struck me with unsettling force. Quavering, I realized how I stood, actually, physically stood, upon generations of victims sacrificed to this blasphemous snake god. The earth had been soiled with the flesh and bones of a never-ending procession of innocents, and now only I lived. As I realized that the mistress of the manor must have played a crucial role in supplying the steady stream of poor and likely enslaved victims, it became clear to me that I had unfinished business. I needed to return to those luxurious chambers, reeking ever so temptingly of debauchery, and confront that icy lady with her crimes.
It's true then. You've defeated our lord. No. I must thank you. Our lord was yet weak. You have taught us that defeat is not the end. Our lord is immortal, and will one day rise again. Stronger. Until then, I must stay the path and do my part.
Was this her way of coping with insurmountable defeat? Well, each to his own. I, for one, found her almost as loathsome as the enormous serpent itself. As I took a moment to appreciate this experience for what it was, a lesson in the futility of believing this world held bravery and goodness, I felt compelled to do one final thing. As I stepped into that inhuman wasteland, I noticed something I had overlooked earlier. The huge and revolting head of the serpent. What exactly was going on here? What the...
Oh, you... Allow me some time. Our lord's carcass is vast, and not easily consumed. Dear Rykard, please, find purchase within me. I wish to be your serpent, your family.
What a sick woman, twisted to her very bones, utterly unable to comprehend the full magnitude of their depraved ways. I just stood there, paralyzed, and watched this ungodly scene of bodily horrors unfold before my very eyes.
Let us devour the gods together.
In the end, I managed to pull myself away and left the manor, never to return again. I didn't get to part with the quaint hunchback of a maiden, nor that strange knight who wore a monstrosity of a helmet. The grand estate, with all of its secrets, dissolved behind me. It would, in time, become a faint memory, with only his laughter echoing in remote corners of my